A single oil lamp shudders against the canvas of a campaign tent. Beyond the flap, the Danube frontier lies locked in frozen mud, and somewhere in that dark, Germanic war bands are screaming into the cold. Inside, the most powerful man alive lifts a reed pen and dips it in ink. His name is Marcus Aurelius. He is not signing edicts. He is not marking troop positions on a map. He is writing to himself. Line after line on rough papyrus, he writes about reason, about virtue, and about meeting death without flinching. This is the Philosopher King. The man trying to live a quiet, stoic life inside an empire splitting at the seams. Then the scratch of the pen dies away. In its place, a roar. We are no longer inside a quiet tent on the frontier. We are in an arena, in the bleached glare of the Roman sun. A man is dragged to an iron chair that has been heated until it glows a low, sullen red. When they press him down, his skin fuses to the metal. Smoke rises into the stands. Nearby, a young woman is sewn inside a heavy net and shoved into the sand. A bull is loosed. Its horns catch the mesh, tossing her body up and up again until she stops moving. These are not barbarian acts. This is Roman law, authorized by the very philosopher on the throne. How did the emperor who preached universal reason become the architect of one of the cruelest religious purges in Roman history? This is the story of how a philosopher's logic and his quiet contempt for a faith he refused to understand became the moral cover for state-sanctioned slaughter. Chapter 1. The Splitting Seams. The year is AD 165. The Roman Empire looks magnificent on a map, but maps lie. The luxury of the capital is a thin veneer covering a structure that is beginning to crack from the inside out. 4 years, the legions had been fighting in the east under Lucius Verus, the co-emperor and adopted brother of Marcus Aurelius. They had marched across dusty roads, taken cities, burned palaces, and sacked the great temple of Apollo at Seleucia on the Tigris. The soldiers returned with gold, with glory, and with something else. Something invisible. The old historians wrote that a Roman officer opened a sealed casket inside a broken sanctuary, and a curse rose out of the dark. That is myth. But the timing was not. The disease followed the army home like a shadow that could not be outrun. Black pustules broke out across human skin. Throats swelled until the air could not pass. Eyes bled. The soldiers marched west, carrying the sickness inside them to the camps on the Rhine, to the docks of Alexandria, and straight into the 7 hills of Rome. The Antonine Plague had arrived, and it would stay for 15 years. This was not an enemy a legion could break. No formation could meet it. No general could outflank it. It moved through walls, through linen, and through the breath of a wife kissing her husband goodbye. To the Roman mind, a disaster of this scale could only mean one thing. The Pax Deorum, the peace with the gods, was broken. Picture Rome in those months. It was a slow-cooking tomb of 1,000,000 souls. The summer sun pressed down on the stone streets like a kiln, and the air grew thick with the sweet rot of bodies left too long indoors. In the Subura, the great slum where 6-story wooden tenements leaned over narrow alleys, families locked their doors and died together. When the corpse collectors finally arrived, they hauled the dead out by the ankles and stacked them on carts like cordwood. Senator and slave tumbled into the same lime pits together. When a Roman did not understand a disaster, he turned to the gods. The relationship was a strict contract. Rome offered the correct prayers and sacrifices. The gods granted safety. Because the plague did not stop, the city threw itself into a fever of devotion that bordered on madness. Sacrifices doubled. The great altars grew slick with the blood of hundreds of bulls. Old, forgotten rituals were dragged out of dusty scrolls. Marcus Aurelius, acting as Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, sat through long nights debating which calendars had been disrespected. He did what duty required. He ordered the sacred prophetic texts opened. The priests read, the emperor obeyed, and long processions of citizens marched through the streets, beating their chests and begging for mercy. But the bodies kept coming. And when prayer fails, terror sours into suspicion. If the gods remained furious after all these offerings, then someone inside the empire must be sabotaging the prayers. Someone was poisoning the spiritual air. The mob began to look around for a face to blame, and they found one. They found the Christians. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe and share to support the channel. To the average Roman, the Christians were not just strangers, they were dangerous. They met in private rooms behind locked doors. They refused to hold public office. They would not stand at the city festivals, and they would not toss even a single pinch of incense onto the fire burning before the imperial portrait. In Roman eyes, honoring the emperor was not a matter of personal faith, it was a basic civic duty. To refuse was to spit on the face of Rome itself. Worse, the Romans had a scary word for people who would not honor the gods. Atheist. Not as the word is used today, but meaning someone who was actively pulling down the roof of the world. Someone whose very presence brought the raw, burning wrath of heaven onto every innocent neighbor. Then came the whispers, rumors built on panic in the dark. The city decided it knew what happened in those secret Christian meetings. They had heard stories of eating flesh and drinking blood, the language of the bread and wine twisted by terrified ears. The horrific accusation spread that they stole infants, slit their throats over altars, and ate them. Educated men wrote about these abominations in their private letters, while the angry mob screamed about them in the streets. They heard that these people called each other brother and sister, that they greeted one another with a holy kiss, and a society obsessed with order decided it meant only one thing: incestuous orgies tangled in the dark of basement churches. This was the terrifying caricature of a Christian in the year AD 167. An atheist, a cannibal, a traitor, an enemy of mankind. A populace boiling with grief and panic does not need any more convincing. The stage was set, the match was struck, and the fire was about to spread far beyond the capital. Chapter 2, The Gateway of Gaul. The terror traveled north and west along the great stone veins of the empire, moving past the mountain passes and down the river valleys until it reached the ultimate crown of the northern provinces. Lugdunum, modern Lyon, France. A massive, sprawling metropolis built where two great rivers, the Rhône and the Saône, locked together in a single violent current. Founded more than a century earlier by a lieutenant of Julius Caesar, it was a city of 40,000 souls, a place of soaring stone amphitheaters, water rushing through 4 massive aqueducts, and a mint that struck the silver coin for half the Western world. It was the very seat of the imperial cult for 60 different Gallic tribes, the proud birthplace of the Emperor Claudius, a fortress of civilization cutting through the vast northern wilds. But beneath the grandeur of the marble columns and the bustling river docks, the air was growing thick with suspicion. The plague had crawled up the river valleys, and it was thinning the population of Gaul just as it had devastated Rome. People were dying in the stone tenements near the water. Families were vanishing, and the old Gallic gods were silent. Every summer, delegates from all 60 tribes gathered at the foot of the hill for a massive federal festival. A week of wild games, blood sports, and sacrifices to celebrate the genius of the emperor. But the energy had changed, desperation had taken hold. The governor of the province sat in his high judicial chair, watching the numbers drop, watching the treasury bleed, and feeling the heavy pressure from the throne on the Danube. The emperor needed order. The empire needed the gods appeased, and the crowds needed a spectacle large enough to drown out their own weeping. And right there, living quietly in the shadows of the great temples, was the perfect target. A small, Greek-speaking community of Christian immigrants had taken root in the lower parts of the city. They were merchants from Smyrna selling wool, doctors from Phrygia who had come to treat the sick, tutors and slaves bought from the coastal markets. They were outsiders in every possible way, strange in their language, and even stranger in their worship. They did not participate in the grand civic pride of Lugdunum, and in a world falling apart, their silence looked exactly like treason. The machinery of persecution did not start with a sudden flash of soldiers' spears. No, it started with the cold shoulder of neighbors. First came the quiet exclusion. The Christians were barred from entering the great marketplace below the hill. Then they were banned from the public baths. And in a Roman city, being shut out of the baths was a social death sentence. It meant you could not sign a contract. You could not hear the news. You could not exist in public life. Then, the exclusion sharpened into violence. Stones began to fly through the streets. Spit rained down on their cloaks. Angry mobs gathered in the alleys, kicking in doors at night and dragging out furniture while the rest of the neighborhood stood on their steps and watched, cheering them on. The local magistrates did nothing to stop it. They simply watched the pressure build, waiting for the perfect moment to turn the mob into an instrument of the state. In the center of this gathering storm stood an old man, a man whose life linked the present horror to the very birth of the faith. His name was Pothinus, the bishop of the city, and he was over 90 years old. He had been born when Trajan was emperor, around the year AD 87. As a young boy in Asia Minor, he had sat at the feet of the great martyr Polycarp, the man who had been burned alive in the stadium of Smyrna while the crowds cheered. Pothinus had carried that memory inside his bones for decades. He had carried it across the Mediterranean, over the Alpine passes, and straight into the heart of Gaul. Now, his own hair was white, his breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, and the same dark shadow was knocking on his door. Beside the fragile bishop stood the pillars of his small flock. Sanctus, a young deacon from the neighboring town of Vienne, a man with a spine of iron and a voice that refused to tremble. Maturus, a new convert whose baptismal water was barely dry, yet he possessed the fierce courage of a veteran soldier. Alexander, a brilliant physician from Phrygia who had spent the plague years comforting the dying, risking his life to heal the very people who now cursed his name in the streets. And Attalus, a man of high standing, a Roman citizen by birth, whose wealth and education should have protected him from the fury of the streets. But there was another, someone the world considered completely worthless. Deep inside a household near the river, where the water of the Saône ran cold and gray, a young slave girl knelt over her daily chores. Her fingers were white from scrubbing linen, her shoulders ached from the endless weight of water jars, her body was small and frail, and her mistress often worried she would not survive the bitter northern winters. Her name was Blandina. She had no titles, no citizenship, no power. In the eyes of Roman law, she was not even a person. She was property, a tool with a voice. Yet, while the city screamed for blood outside her window, she moved her pale lips in silent, unshakable prayer, completely unaware that her name would outlast the empire itself. The dispatches from the Danube had already crossed the Alps. The riders of the imperial post were changing horses every 15 miles, carrying the legal framework that would unleash the final horror, and they were only days away. Chapter 3, The Hall of Marble. The blow fell in the middle of summer, sudden, brutal, and total. Soldiers of the urban cohort marched into the lower city, dragging the leaders of the church out of their homes and into the forum. The elderly Pothinus had to be carried by his followers. His legs could no longer support his weight. The crowd surged around them, spitting, striking them with sticks, screaming for their immediate destruction. The prisoners were marched straight into the great basilica on the north side of the square. It was a massive hall designed to showcase the terrifying majesty of Roman law, faced in brilliant white marble shipped up the river from Italy, lined with heavily armed guards, and dominated by the high judicial platform where the governor sat in his purple-edged toga. This was not a back-alley lynching. No. This was the state performing an act of legal theater for a panicking public. The governor leaned forward from his ivory chair, his eyes scanning the bleeding, exhausted faces before him, and the interrogations began. The goal was not to find the truth. The goal was to extract a confession. He needed just one of them to crack. He needed them to admit to the stolen babies, to the incest, to the hatred of the human race. A single public confession would validate the terror, it would satisfy the mob, and it would prove to the emperor that the peace of the gods was being restored. The torturers brought out the standard tools of provincial justice, tools designed to dismantle human dignity piece by piece. First came the flagrum, a heavy whip with multiple leather tails weighted with lead balls and sharp shards of bone. The strikes rained down on bare backs, peeling away the skin, exposing the muscle underneath until the floor of the basilica was slick with blood. Then, the wooden rack, ropes tied to wrists and ankles, turned slowly by iron cranks until bones popped from their sockets with a sickening crack. Some broke. About 10 ordinary members of the community collapsed in those first terrifying hours, weeping, begging for mercy, agreeing to toss the incense onto the pagan fire. The letter writers recorded their fall with deep, agonizing sorrow, calling them stillborn, but the core of the group stood like granite. The governor's face darkened. The standard tools were failing. He ordered the iron claws brought out, long heavy hooks used to tear the flanks and ribs of the prisoners. Muscle was ripped away. The chest cavities were exposed, but no confessions came. He turned his full fury on Sanctus, the young deacon. He was convinced that the younger man would break first under a display of absolute agony, and that his collapse would shatter the resolve of the others. The interrogators barked the 4 fundamental questions of Roman law. Name, city, station, parents. Sanctus looked up through a mask of blood and sweat. His voice was steady, his eyes fixed on the governor, and he answered with only 2 Latin words. Christianus sum. I am a Christian. They asked him again, louder, threatening him with worse torments. Same answer. Christianus sum. The governor lost his temper. He signaled to the executioners standing near a glowing brazier in the corner of the hall. They lifted heavy brass plates with iron tongs, plates that had been heated until they hissed with white-hot fury. They pressed the burning metal against the most sensitive parts of the deacon's body, against his groin, his armpits, the soles of his feet. The stench of cooking human flesh filled the grand marble hall. The scribes stopped writing, their styluses frozen over the wax tablets. Sanctus's body twisted violently against his leather bindings, his skin fused to the metal, his shape becoming something no longer recognizable as human. Yet, through the smoke and the agony, the same 2 words came back across the floor, echoing off the marble columns. Christianus sum. They unhooked his ruined body and dragged him down into the carcer, the underground prison cut into the limestone slope of the hill. No light, no air, no straw, just a pitch-black pit filled with the stench of disease and open wounds. They left him there to die in the dark, certain he would be a corpse by morning. The next day they dragged the elderly Bishop Pothinus out of the dark pit, his frail 90-year-old body shaking with fever, his chest gasping for every tiny pocket of air. The soldiers carried him to the front of the tribunal, and as he stood there the angry crowd surged forward, shouting insults, throwing rocks, screaming for his head. The governor leaned over his high marble desk, his eyes cold and narrow. He looked down at the dying old man and asked the ultimate question of the rite. Who is the God of the Christians? Pothinus did not tremble, he did not beg. He raised his white head, looked the governor straight in the eye, and spoke with the final, crushing authority of a martyr. If you are worthy, you will know. The hall exploded into a frenzy of rage. The guards did not check the crowd, they joined them. Fists rained down on the old man's face. Boots kicked his brittle ribs, heavy wooden stools were hurled from the gallery, smashing against his fragile spine. They beat him until his breath nearly stopped, then dragged him back down the stone steps into the pitch-black carcer. 2 days later, alone in the suffocating dark without a single drop of water, the old bishop died, his long watch finally over. Now the governor turned his eyes toward the one person everyone expected to shatter instantly, the slave girl Blandina. He ordered his torturers to work her in shifts, continuous, relentless, overlapping waves of agony. From the first light of dawn until the sun dropped below the hills, fresh men relieved exhausted ones at the turn of every hour. Each new shift brought a more horrific technique. The whip, the rack, the iron claws, the glowing plates. The survivors wrote that the torturers themselves grew utterly confused, terrified, and exhausted. Any single one of these procedures, they whispered openly, should have killed her within minutes. Her chest was completely torn open. Her ribs were exposed. Her shoulders were dislocated, reset, and dislocated again. Her body had become a single bleeding wound, losing the very shape of a human being. But every time the men paused to breathe, every time they waited for a sob or a confession, she spoke, always the same line, over and over, a steady rhythm in the quiet hall. I am a Christian, and among us no evil is done. The words seemed to act like a physical shield, refreshing her, giving her strength while her torturers grew weak with frustration. By nightfall, the men dropped their irons and gave up. Not because she had broken, but because they had run completely out of ideas. A frail, nameless slave girl had broken the very men paid to destroy her. Chapter 4: The Sand and the Iron. The governor's grand plan was completely unraveling. The public tribunal had been meticulously designed to showcase confessions, but it was producing the exact opposite. Whispers were spreading like wildfire through the streets of Lugdunum, not about the prisoners' alleged guilt, but about their supernatural endurance. Slaves carrying water jars from the public fountains repeated Blandina's defiant line in Greek to other slaves. Soldiers off duty drank in the taverns and argued about the courage they had witnessed. A confession refused so publicly was beginning to look like an accusation against the governor himself. He needed something massive, something brutal enough to bury the growing doubt once and for all. He announced the games. The surviving Christians would be cast to the wild beasts in the city's grand amphitheater as the closing entertainment of the annual festival. The executions were bolted onto the official program, a holiday treat for 20,000 spectators. By morning, the stone benches were packed to absolute capacity. Delegates from 60 tribes sat side by side with Roman elites, their eyes fixed on the iron gates below. Maturus and Sanctus were led out onto the sand first. The deacon could barely stand. His body was still a mass of raw, unhealed flesh from the basilica. He had to be carried across the arena by guards. Before they could even reach the center, they were forced to run the gauntlet, two long lines of men with leather whips slashing at their wounds. Then, the heavy iron gates groaned open, and the starved beasts were loosed from their cages. The animals mauled them, tearing their flesh, dragging them across the sand, but neither man would die. The governor, frantic for a conclusion, ordered the cathedra feria, the iron chair, to be carried out into the open arena. It had been resting over hot coals in the dark tunnels beneath the seats until it glowed a dull, terrifying red. They forced the two broken men down onto the seat. The thick, heavy smell of cooking flesh drifted up into the upper tiers. The crowd nearest the front gasped, pulling their wool cloaks across their faces to block the stench. But Sanctus, sitting on the white-hot metal, gasped out the same two words through the smoke: Christianus sum. Maturus went silent and died on the iron. Sanctus did not. Finally, a gladiator walked out across the red sand, pulled back the deacon's head, and cut his throat with a short Sicca blade. Attalus was brought out next. A placard hung around his neck: "This is Attalus the Christian." But as he was paraded around the perimeter, a shout rose from the crowd. He was a Roman citizen. The governor halted the execution just in time. Citizens could not be legally tortured or executed in the arena without the direct word of the emperor. Attalus was dragged back to the dark cell while a courier was sent racing south to Rome with the file. Days later, the answer arrived from the Danube frontier. Marcus Aurelius's response was simple, precise, and cold. Citizens who confessed to Christianity were to be beheaded immediately. The non-citizens were to be given to the beasts. Those who recanted were to be set free. The philosopher had spoken from his desk, making fine legal distinctions, but providing no mercy. The governor, eager to please the crowd, ignored the rule of the blade and brought Attalus back to the iron chair anyway. As the smoke began to rise from his skin, the citizen turned his head toward the shouting benches and yelled in perfect educated Latin, "This is what you do, eat men. We do not eat men, and we do no other evil." Beside him, Alexander the physician was strapped to a second chair. He did not make a single sound. He simply watched the sky until the fire finished him. Then came the final act, the one the governor had saved for the ultimate climax of the festival. They brought out Blandina, and with her, Ponticus, a boy of only 15 years. He was the youngest of the prisoners, his hands shaking, his face pale under the glare of the Roman sun. The governor's strategy was calculated and cruel. He believed the slave girl who had survived every iron tool would finally shatter if she had to watch a child get torn to pieces. She was forced to stand in the center of the arena and watch every horror happen to the boy first. But the governor had miscalculated completely. Instead of weeping, Blandina leaned toward the boy, her voice ringing out across the sand in Greek, the beautiful, familiar language of the home he had been taken from. The spectators watched in absolute disbelief as the ruined slave girl became the comforter, encouraging the teenager through every slash of the whip, through every snap of the beast's jaws. Ponticus held his ground, his eyes locked onto hers, until his body could hold no longer. He died on the sand, undefeated, looking straight at her. A strange vibe began to ripple through the amphitheater. The loud, thirsty cheers were thinning out. People were turning their faces away. A woman in the lower tier was seen to tightly cover her young child's eyes and refuse to let him look. The crowd was losing its appetite. For Blandina, the arena had prepared a custom ending. They brought out a heavy hemp fishing net, the kind used by the rugged bargemen on the Saône River, coarse and knotted by hand. They shoved her inside, wrapping her tightly until she was completely trapped, a helpless bundle on the sand. Then, the heavy wooden gates beneath the seats groaned open one last time, and a massive bull charged out into the sun. The beast saw the net. It lunged, its sharp horns catching the mesh. It tossed her high into the air, her body slamming back down onto the hard ground with a sickening thud. The animal turned, goring her again, dragging her in a wide, bloody half-circle across the sand. Her bones fractured, her blood stained the earth, but the survivors watching from the gallery wrote something incredible. She did not seem to feel the pain. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, lost in a vision of the heavens. The 20,000 benches went completely silent, the silence of an audience that had grown terrified of its own entertainment. When the bull was finally driven off by the handlers, she was still breathing. A single soldier stepped out into the quiet, drew his short blade, and cut her throat. Chapter 5. The Seed in the River. The governor had won, or so he thought. He had read the emperor's letters, he had followed the law, he had entertained the public, and he had eliminated the target. By every single metric a Roman official used to judge his own performance. He had executed a flawless operation. But the silence inside the amphitheater after Blandina's final breath was a terrifying ghost that would not leave the city. People went home that night and could not sleep. They kept seeing the slave girl in the net. They kept hearing the deacon's 2 Latin words. They began to ask questions in dark corners. Who was this god who could make a slave stronger than a Roman governor? The governor, burning with frustration because he had failed to get a single confession, ordered a final act of spite. He refused to give the corpses to the Christian community for burial. He posted armed guards around the mounds of flesh, leaving them to rot in the open air for 6 days while dogs tore at the remains. What the animals left behind, the soldiers swept up into baskets. They burned the bones and flesh on a massive public pyre, reducing the martyrs to a pile of gray ash. Then, they marched down to the gravel banks where the 2 rivers met and tipped the ashes directly into the swiftest current of the Rhône. The executioners boasted openly into the water, "Now, let us see if they will rise again. Let us see if their God can save them out of our hands." They believed that by destroying the physical body, they were destroying the very hope of the resurrection. They thought the river would carry the problem away into the vast Mediterranean, and that would be the end of it. They were wrong, spectacularly wrong. The river was not hiding the story, it was distributing it. The ashes drifted south, past Vienne, past Valence, past the great coastal docks, but the words stayed behind. The survivors of Lugdunum sat down in their ruined homes and wrote a detailed letter to the mother churches in Asia Minor, counting every stroke, remembering every name, recording every sentence spoken on the sand. That letter was copied by trusted hands, and it took the path of the imperial trade routes. It traveled on merchant ships across the sea, overland along the grand highways, until it was being read aloud in secret gatherings from Antioch to Alexandria. Within a single generation, people who had never even seen Gaul could recite Blandina's line from memory. By the year AD 200, her story was being preached from pulpits in North Africa. The Roman state, with all its legions and its archives, did not understand the war it was fighting. Roman religion was about showing up, pouring the wine, and obeying the state. No one was expected to die for Jupiter. The old gods asked for a fee. They did not ask for your life. But Christianity was a completely different creature. It offered a heroic role to a slave girl. It gave a foreign doctor the same standing before God as a wealthy senator. A philosophical pamphlet written by an emperor about accepting fate could not compete with the raw, bleeding story of a girl in a net. Look at the numbers. They tell the story in a colder language. In the year AD 100, there were perhaps 7,000 Christians in the entire empire. By AD 200, 20 years after the purge, that number had exploded to 200,000. By AD 300, past 6 million. The curve did not bend at the persecutions, it steepened. The blood was not a deterrent, it was the seed. Return one final time to the campaign tent on the frozen Danube frontier. It is winter late in the emperor's reign, and the Marcomannic wars are grinding away the last remnants of his strength. Outside the canvas, the wind howls through the dark forests of Central Europe, and the ice on the river cracks like a snapping bone. Inside, the oil lamp burns low. The fuel keeping the small flame alive is olive oil, shipped north in heavy clay jars from southern Spain, by way of the river docks at Lugdunum itself. Marcus Aurelius sits at his camp table, his skin pale, his body exhausted by years of constant warfare. He dips his reed pen into the black ink and continues his private journal, the pages that the world would eventually call the Meditations. He writes to himself, a strict discipline to keep his mind steady under the weight of an empire that is slipping into chaos. He writes about kindness, about patience, about rising above the cruelty of ordinary men. In Book 6, his pen leaves the immortal words, "The best revenge is not to be like him who performed the injury." In Book 8, he writes, "Men exist for the sake of one another. Teach them or bear with them." The same hand wrote those beautiful philosophical thoughts, on the exact same Danubian nights, under the exact same lamplight, that signed the execution dispatches for the provinces. The gap between the two columns of his life never closed. The emperor never addresses the contradiction in his pages. He may not have even realized a contradiction existed. To him, the journal was his private moral hygiene, while the executions were simply public administration. The philosopher and the tyrant lived in the very same skull, entirely separated by a wall of quiet contempt for a faith they refused to understand. But the verdict of history is far more brutal than the smooth marble busts suggest. The Antonine Plague, which the emperor tried to stop with the blood of martyrs, destroyed between 5 and 10 million people across the empire, nearly 10% of the entire population. The legions never fully recovered the manpower they lost. The tax registers showed whole villages completely wiped out, and the northern frontier that Marcus Aurelius bled to protect would begin to buckle within 2 generations. His son Commodus, whom he raised to rule at his side, would prove completely unfit for the throne from the moment his father died. Commodus would dress as Hercules, fight as a gladiator in the arena against opponents armed with wooden swords, and rename the months of the year after his own titles before being strangled in his bath by a wrestler. The empire would plunge into the long crisis of the 3rd century, 50 years of civil war, economic collapse, and a revolving door of 26 different emperors. And the faith that the Philosopher King tried so hard to crush? Within 150 years of his death, it would be sitting on the imperial throne itself. In the year AD 312, the Emperor Constantine would order the Christian symbol painted on his soldiers' shields before marching into battle at the Milvian Bridge. In AD 313, the Edict of Milan would officially end all state-sanctioned persecutions, and by AD 380, Christianity would become the exclusive official religion of the Roman state. The Grand Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline, whose altars ran red with the blood of thousands of bulls during the plague years, fell into complete ruin and disuse. The sacred Vestal flame in the Forum was extinguished by imperial decree, and the ancient prophetic books were burned to ash. The great amphitheater at Lugdunum, where Blandina's bones were broken on the sand, was slowly dismantled for building stone by local peasants. Its ruins buried under the dirt until archaeologists finally uncovered them in the mid-20th century. Marcus Aurelius died on March 17, AD 180, at the fortress of Vindobona, modern Vienna. He was 58 years old, his body broken by the plague or by the poison of his own doctors. The ancient historians record his final words to the tribune of the watch who came to ask for the nightly password. The dying emperor looked up through the shadows of his tent and said, "Go to the rising sun. I'm already setting." He turned his face to the dark wall and was gone by morning. His ashes were carried back to Rome and placed in a massive brick mausoleum by the Tiber River. A great victory column was raised in his honor in the center of the city, 30 meters of spiraling marble showing his soldiers burning barbarian villages, destroying homes, and leading away weeping captives in chains. At the very summit, a bronze statue of the Stoic emperor looked out over the capital. But in the year 1589, a pope ordered that bronze statue to be taken down and melted away. In its place, at the highest point of the emperor's monument, they set a statue of the Apostle Paul. The dead of Lugdunum do not appear anywhere on the stones of that column. They never needed to. The philosopher had written a brilliant book to himself, but the slave girl had written a story to the entire world. And of the two documents, only one reshaped the human heart forever. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.